So we're going to get this ball rolling with me. And so I think what's really going to work out well is either I'm going to do a really good job and whet your appetite and get you all excited for apologetics, or I'm going to completely bomb, and so it's all uphill from here. And so either way, hopefully that's going to go well. I'm hoping I'm not blocking people's view. I'll be moving around, so it doesn't matter. All right. Okay. So here's the deal. We're talking, helps if I turn that on. We're talking apologetics. We're talking being able to defend your faith. That as you go through life, right, as Christians, we know in this culture that there are all sorts of things that come against us, different ideas that say, no, you're wrong. Not just that you're wrong, but that you're foolish. And so how is it that you stand firm in that? And that's the whole reason why we do this. And so what I'm going to do is just give a very brief kind of bird's eye view, 30,000 foot kind of idea of how we can know, how we can trust, kind of stand firm that Christianity is true. So I think that should kind of get us some foundation, get us started. These guys will probably talk about it a little more focused, a little more kind of specific topics. I'm going to go big. I'm going to go general. Okay, so, excuse me. Just had to run back there and do something first. Before we really get rolling in that, we have to understand that to be something to be true, there's all sorts of things that people can talk about. If you've delved into apologetics at all, and here in this church we have, it's a wide range of topics that people will bring up and talk about and argue about. I am a simple guy. I don't like to get too complex. I think especially a lot of the important things in life can be boiled down pretty simple. And so if we have any Skinner fans, that's probably my life song as a simple man. And so we're going to keep it simple. In order to show that Christianity is true, you only need two things. You need to show that God exists, and you're going to need Jesus coming back from the dead. You get those two things, Christianity is true. We can talk about all kinds of other things that are details around the issues and how certain things fit together, but if you can get those two things, Christianity is true. And I think we can get those two things. So the idea that God exists, there's all sorts of things that people will talk about with the existence of God. Different people have their different arguments they prefer. There's all sorts of arguments out there. Some very popular one is cosmological arguments, right? Where did the universe come from? Why does anything exist at all? Why is there something rather than nothing? And one of the most popular forms of this kind of argument is called the Kalam, and it goes basically like this. Anything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. That first one, anything that begins to exist has a cause, I really hope I don't need to argue for that one. Anything that begins to exist had to have something else to cause it. You can't cause yourself to exist, because in order to cause yourself to exist, you would have to exist before you exist, so that you existed to cause yourself to exist. I hope that is plain enough to everybody, that we don't really need to argue that one too hard. So what about this other one? The universe began to exist. See, again, I like to keep things simple. There's a lot of people that will go and argue science. They want to go back to Big Bang. They want to talk about all this big, deep, detailed information. I don't think we have to go that far. Because I think it's actually really simple that the universe has to begin to exist, because you can't go backwards infinitely. You cannot have a past infinite, and I think it's fairly simple and easy to show. You cannot traverse an infinite distance. So let me put it this way. That wall over there is what, about 30 feet away, 25, 30 feet away? You can cross that distance very easy. You start there, you come here. But what if that wall was an infinite distance away? Are you ever going to get from there to here? Can't happen. Same thing with time. Right? If the past is a certain time away, then you can get from the past to the present. But if the past was an infinite amount of time away, you can never traverse from there to today. So if the universe was infinite, we wouldn't be at today. You could never get here. And I know that can probably kind of cook your noodle a little bit if you sit and think about it too hard, but that's what happens when you get around paradoxes and that sort of thing. They don't make sense because it couldn't happen. The universe has to have a beginning. And so if the universe has a beginning, then we're talking about God. And by the way, this beginning, this cause, this thing that began the universe It has to be outside the universe. It can't be part of the universe. And when we talk about the universe, what we're talking about are things that are space, time, and material. So this cause has to be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. That sounds pretty familiar. Then you have teleological arguments. These are fun, but they can get kind of detailed. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. You have your typical kind of what's called the watchmaker argument. You know, these sorts of things. You're walking along, you find a watch on the ground, and you go, oh, wow, look what nature produced. You know, you're not going to do that because you're going to see it's obvious, the intricate, the gears and the everything. It's not just that it looks designed, but it serves a function. There's actually purpose and engineering into it. Well, we find that same kind of thing in nature whenever we find things that are obviously designed for purpose, for functions, and so we see design in nature, and things that are designed need a designer. You also have fine-tuning. This one's always fun to get into, but again, I'm not going to go into great detail because it's not my favorite. But you get things like all sorts of constants and factors in the universe that if they're just a little bit different, we're not here. If gravity was too strong or if gravity was too weak, we wouldn't be here. If the earth was a little too close to the sun, a little too far away, we wouldn't be here. And you can go on. There's dozens of such things that if they were just a little bit different, we wouldn't be here. And whenever you total them all up, the fun thing there is that the probabilities are so astronomical, literally astronomical, that it would actually be miraculous for them to all come together in just the right way by sheer chance alone. My favorite of these sorts of arguments, though, is DNA. Because in your cells, you have what basically amounts to a biological computer code telling your cells what to do. That's fantastic. That it's not just that you have some stuff in your body doing whatever, but there's actually information embedded in the molecules in your cells. Richard Dawkins, famous atheist, said an amoeba has as much information in its DNA as 1,000 complete sets of Encyclopedia Britannica. You younger folk, if you printed out Wikipedia, that's what you would have, right? Encyclopedias, you know, how many of y'all had encyclopedias? Oh, y'all actually had? I apologize. Y'all know what they are. Or did they have them? Do they know what they are? Or was that just you? They know what they are? Right? You get these books that are like this thick, right? And of course, they're like this big, right? They don't fit on a regular bookshelf. You have to get a bigger bookshelf just to fit them. And you get like 30-something volumes of this thing. And he's saying that there's enough information in DNA for 1,000 sets of that. That's a lot of information, and it's not just nonsense information. It's very specific, it's functional, it's telling your cells what to do, kind of like a computer software. Bill Gates actually said that DNA is like computer program, only more complex than anything we ever made. If you have a computer program in your cells, how do you get a computer program without a computer programmer? Again, we see God. Now, by the way, a God that's designing these kind of things is going to have to be intelligent as well, not just some random force or cause. However, my personal favorite evidence for the existence of God has to be the problem of evil. Now, most people are going to go, wait, back up. That's supposed to be evidence against God, but I don't think that is actually the case. Because in order to have evil, you have to have good. Does that make sense? You can't get good, or you can't get evil without good. Evil is actually the absence of good. It's a violation of what is good. It's like I compare it to, say, light or heat, right? Darkness isn't a thing in itself. It's only defined as an absence of light, right? Cold is not a thing within itself. It's only defined as an absence of heat. Evil is not really a thing in and of itself. It's defined according to good. And you can't have goodness if you don't have God. We'll get to that in just a second. But what ends up happening is if someone is going to posit the problem of evil and say, there's evil in the world, God can't exist, a loving, powerful God can't exist because there is evil. Well, there's all sorts of ways that people have unpacked and explained that. And that's not the point of what I'm here to get into right now. But in order to even claim the problem of evil in the world, you're going to land yourself right smack dab in the middle of what's called the moral argument for the existence of God. That objective, if there is no God, then objective morality does not exist. Objective morality does exist, therefore, God exists. Now, the problem of evil affirms this one. Objective morality exists. Because if you're talking about something being evil in the world, you have to actually be pointing at something that you're saying that is evil. Not just my opinion, it really is that way. And so even by attempting to put forward the problem of evil, they're affirming that second premise in the argument. But they go, yeah, that might be the case, but that first one, that's where you get in trouble. You don't need to have God in order to have morality. Well, the thing is, there's only a few candidates for where morality might come from. They fall into a few different categories, different ways people try to cash it out, but they boil down to a few different categories. One is kind of relativism, right? Your own opinion. That seems wrong to me. Well, okay, that's fine, but that really just gets down to your opinion. And you may be really smart, but it's still just your opinion. It seems that way to you, but what if it seems different to me? How do we decide who is right? You need a standard beyond you to adjudicate and judge between the two. Some people say, well, no, it's social contract. That's what it is, that we as societies have decided the ways that we should function properly. Well, all that does is take that relativism of the individual and kick it up to a group situation. So now you can have this group that says one thing is moral and this other group that says it's immoral. Which one's right? If all morality is group opinion, you still have the same problem. You need something above, beyond, transcending those groups to judge and determine, referee between them, which one is actually right. So you still don't get morality. Some people will say, we evolved that way. It's kind of ingrained in us. It's biological. It's just born into how we are because of how we evolved. Well, if that were the case, what if some other strand of humanity evolved some other way, some other sense of morals? Who is right and who is wrong? Because again, you have a conflict of interest. You have a conflict of claims. They can't both be right. Something above and beyond, outside of humanity, has to be there to proclaim and adjudicate what actually is right and what actually is wrong. And so you need that standard outside of nature, something that is beyond nature, supernatural, you might say, in order to give you morality. And so we end up with, therefore, God exists, because no other option offered actually gets you objective morality. It just kind of gets you to different forms of opinions, but that's all they really end up being. So the problem of evil backs you, kind of paints you into a corner of the moral argument, which then proves that God exists. And by the way, this God that it proves exists, we know that it has to be moral in the sense that it does moral things, has moral choices. Not just that God is good, though he is, but is moral in that sense of making moral choices, affecting moral things, and has to be personal because morality involves persons. Right? Animals' activity aren't immoral or moral, right? Whenever a lion chases down and brutally devours and rips apart a zebra, it didn't murder the zebra, it just had lunch. Whenever the book falls off your shelf and hits you in the head, the book did not just assault you. Right? Morality only makes sense in terms of persons. And so this cause would have to be personal and moral. And by the way, there are many more arguments for the existence of God that could be talked about. I'm not going to go into those because I think I have adequately made my point. However, there are tons more that could be said. So when it comes to the issue of God, yes, he exists. And we've seen that he has to be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, personal, moral, and intelligent. And so God exists. I'm only needing to show two things to prove Christianity is true, that God exists and Jesus rose from the dead. God exists. We got that one. Okay, so what about this resurrection thing? Right? People will say, a resurrection? Someone coming back from the dead? That is crazy. That's extraordinary. And an extraordinary claim, they say, requires an extraordinary evidence. I don't buy that because the idea of what is or is not extraordinary is very, very subjective. Extraordinary is in the eye of the beholder. And so what may be extraordinary to someone else may not be extraordinary to you. For some people, claims of answered prayers, that's just amazing. I could never believe that. For other people, well, it's just Tuesday, because that's how God rolls. Okay, so this doesn't actually hold water. But let's just say that you needed extraordinary evidence to show extraordinary claims. I'm not going to make any extraordinary claims. No extraordinary claims here. I'm going to make two very, very ordinary claims. I said I like to be simple. Let's keep it simple. In order to show the resurrection, we only need to show two things, and they are very ordinary. We have to show that somebody died, and then we have to show that someone was alive. That's all I need to show the resurrection, that Jesus died, and then that Jesus was alive. Now, people might get upset about the order that these events take place in, but that's a different issue. I'm just looking at the ordinary evidence of what is going on. So let's look at this idea that Jesus died. That Jesus died. Did he actually die? Well, yes, he did. According to Gerd Ludemann, who is an atheist, let's not pick Christians and be biased here, he says that Jesus' death as a consequence of crucifixion is indisputable. We have Paula Fredrickson, who is Jewish. I'm not sure if she's actually born Jewish or if she's converted, but she's a follower of Judaism, so no fan of Christianity. She says, the single most solid fact about Jesus' life is his death. He was executed by the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate on or around Passover in the manner Rome reserved particularly for political insurrectionists, namely crucifixion. Historians know that Jesus died. It's not really an issue. This one's a fact. So we have two ordinary claims we're trying to prove. I'm not going to argue about the issue of Jesus dying. We just had two non-biased historians who are not small fries by any means saying, yeah, you know what, this is a fact. Jesus lived, Jesus died. One of the most well-known historical facts. And so there is that. So we've got a dead guy. We only got two things we got to show. We got to show that there was a dead guy. We got to show that he was alive. Very ordinary things. How do you show that someone's alive? Well, we actually get people claiming they saw him. The evidence we have that Jesus is alive. How do you show someone is alive historically? Well, there's records of him being alive. That his disciples actually give, easy for me to say, his disciples actually gave sincere accounts of having experienced seeing him alive after his crucifixion. Not only did they say there were multiple occasions by both individuals and groups. And this is found in, aside from a few other things also, in what you should refer to as the primary source historical documents, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and some other documents in the New Testament. Don't let anyone tell you the Bible's not history. Don't let anyone get away with just dismissing that as some religious book. These are historical documents, some of the most reliable historical documents, and to treat them otherwise is, well, just being a little irrational, I say. Okay, so you have these claims, but why should we believe them? What evidence do we have kind of backing them up that shows that they should be believed? I'm glad you asked. We have Mike Licona, by the way, just to put this out there. Mike Licona says, this conclusion, that they sincerely experienced something they claim was the risen Jesus, is granted by nearly unanimous consensus of modern scholars and may therefore be added to our historical bedrock. But some of you may know Mike Licona is a Christian. Can't trust him. He's biased. Good point. Paula Fredrickson, again, Jewish scholar, describes the disciples' conviction that they had seen the risen Christ as historical bedrock facts known past doubting. And just put a little more icing on that cake. Again, Gerd Ludemann, it may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. Now these scholars are going to say, well, I don't believe it actually was the risen Jesus, but they saw something. I don't know what they saw, but they saw something. It is historical fact that the disciples sincerely claim to have seen the risen Jesus. Okay, so we got the dead guy, we got the claims. Why should we believe them? Well, we got some facts that we can look at. We see that Jesus was indeed buried in a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea, and that tomb was later found empty. Okay, so this is backed up by the, again, primary source documents in the New Testament. There is no competing evidence for any competing theory. It's not out there. There's not evidence that something else happened with the body. There's not evidence that some other events took place. This is what we have. This is what history tells us took place. We also can be kind of sure the tomb was empty because the testimony of it being found was given by women, which at the time, women folk weren't exactly believed to be all that reliable. So if you're making it up and it wasn't true, you're not going to put that in there. Also, the enemies of Christianity admitted by their criticisms that the tomb was empty. We see in Matthew, he records that the Pharisees, the high priests, were saying, hey, let's just say that the disciples stole the body. And later, early church fathers were having to argue the same kind of criticisms. If your opponent's criticisms confirm your claims, that's a pretty good sign that it's true. So the tomb was indeed empty. Also, Joseph of Arimathea was a public figure. He was a member of the Sanhedrin. These claims are going on in the very place where he's serving on a council. If they're not true, it could have very easily been refuted, but it was not. I have a historian, D.H. Van Dalen, who says, most people who object to the story do so on other than historical grounds. It is commonplace to say that the story fits into an ancient view of the world, but not into ours. Meaning that they may have believed that, but we don't believe that now. Why not? That is just worldview bias, choosing what you want to believe and what you don't. The presence of a body would have been evidence against the resurrection of Jesus. It would have been evidence against the empty tomb. Is the tomb empty? No, there's the body. The fact that there is no body shows the tomb was empty. But it's not just an empty tomb. The disciples are transformed. Okay, fictional experiences that you don't really have do not transform you. Amen? Right? You don't get radically transformed by things that you make up. See, the disciples had lost hope, right? Their Messiah, their Savior, their King just got killed on a Roman cross. Everything about that tells them we were wrong, he's not it. And they go into hiding. I mean, because if they just killed Jesus, what are they going to do to us? So they lose hope, and they're scared and in hiding. But then we see something happened, and all of a sudden they're out boldly proclaiming in the public square, before kings, before councils, before courts, boldly proclaiming the resurrection of Jesus at risk of imprisonment, torture, and even death and loss of livelihood and everything in between. So what happened? Well, what they claim happened is they met the risen Jesus. Fake events don't bring about that kind of change in your life. But it's not just the disciples. You could easily say, yeah, but the disciples, they just wanted to believe it so bad. Well, but there's people who had no interest in believing it, and they came to believe it. You have enemy testimony. You have the well-known one of Paul the Apostle, who was Saul of Tarsus, on the fast track to leadership. He was a Pharisee. He was studying under the number one rabbi at the time. He was on the fast track in the in crowd. He had permission and authority to go persecute and arrest Christians. But then something happened. And he switched, and he actually became the greatest evangelist for Christianity in the world. Well, what happened? According to Paul, what happened is he met Jesus, risen from the dead. But then you also have the family of Jesus. Jesus' own brother James, who in the Gospels, we see him very much portrayed as a skeptic, who at one point, the family comes to get Jesus and bring him home because they think he's talking crazy. At one point, it says Jesus' brothers, which would have included James, were almost taunting Jesus. Hey, are you going down to the festival? Right? The Pharisees are looking to kill him, and they're telling him, are you going down? You better go. I mean, hey, if you go down and do these things in public, more people are going to believe you. Skeptics. But then we see later that James is not only becomes a Christian, he's a leader in the church and writes one of the books of the Bible. Now, what makes that change in the brother of Jesus to suddenly think that Jesus is Messiah? Well, according to James, it's that he saw Jesus rise from the dead. So if you have skeptics also claiming it, that is pretty good evidence. And then we have the spread of the Christian church. That in a situation under intense persecution, in a cultural milieu that just would have everything against them, they still boldly proclaimed and went forward with this message. Why would they do that? Well, their claim is because they saw the risen Christ. Okay, so we have these facts. We have this claim that we have the dead guy. We know we have the dead guy. Now we have this evidence that, hey, maybe he was alive again. But how do we make sense out of that evidence? There's several kind of things that people try to bring up. Some will say, well, he didn't really die. Sorry, try again. You just ran afoul of the facts of history. We know he died. They'll say, well, you know what? The disciples lied. No, sorry, try again. Historians confirm they were sincere in their claims. Besides which, why would they lie? I don't think they could actually get away with it because the lie began in Jerusalem, where it would have been very easy for people to just kick that aside, refute it, and show that it's false. So it wasn't that the disciples lied. Some people will say, oh, it was hallucination. Sure, they sincerely saw something, but they imagined it. Well, the problem with that is, as historians will confirm, that some of these claims of appearances were in groups. How do you know something's a hallucination? If you see something and you think, is that real? You go, hey, do you see that too? And if they see it too, you know you're not hallucinating. So it couldn't have been hallucination. There were group appearances. Some people say it was an imposter. I liked this one. This one was funny. An imposter. Okay, well, first off, it's an imposter. The real Jesus should still be in the tomb. But let's just say for some reason the tomb's empty, but there is an imposter. Well, you either have two options. Either the imposter is being put up by the disciples, in which case they're lying. Hold on, back up. We just said they're not lying. We know they're not lying. Which means that the imposter is actually conning the disciples. That doesn't work. Con men need to know more about that topic than you do. That's how they con you successfully. If you know more than a con man, they can't con you. An imposter who's going to come and claim to be Jesus has to be able to fool people who lived and walked with him for more than 3 years, plus his own family? There's no imposter pulling that off. Some people say, well, the story changed over time. Sorry, time out, back up. Again, you're running afoul of the facts. These are sincere claims by the disciples, and the Bible dates it right to a few years after the fact. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul mentions a creed that he says he received from the apostles. That he says, I've taught to you what I received. And historians go, what he's talking about is when he received this and confirmed this teaching from the disciples in Jerusalem, and that meeting took place within just a few years after the crucifixion of Jesus. So this isn't a story that changed over time. This is the story from the very beginning. The only other option that really makes sense of all the facts is that they're telling the truth. They actually did see Jesus alive, which gives us the resurrection. And the only reason people would bring that into any kind of doubt is because they go, whoa, that's extraordinary to me. It's not extraordinary. We just proved a dead guy. That's simple. That's ordinary. We see it all the time. And now we've shown that he was alive. Evidence shows. There's no extraordinary claims going on here. Ordinary evidence, he died. Ordinary evidence, he was seen alive. There we go. Resurrection. Done. So what do we have? Well, we showed that God exists, and we showed that Jesus rose from the dead. What does that give us? Christianity is true. And you think, wow, that was easy, Pastor Mark. You still got some time left. You're right. Let me fill that up. Here's the thing. Christianity, aside from this evidential case that we can look at and we can see, and there are a ton more that can be said about this, I think one of the central things that we can look at and we can see that just Christianity obviously matches with the world is that Christianity gives us our purpose. And it gives us a purpose we all kind of already know that we have. I remember listening to an interview the other day, I believe Ravi Zacharias, and he said the single greatest pursuit of young people today is the pursuit of meaning. Everywhere you look, the world is hungry, thirsty for meaning. People are crying out, wanting, seeking, looking for something. And as our culture becomes increasingly secular, they search more and more because atheism has nothing to offer when it comes to meaning and purpose. People say, well, we make it up ourselves. I decide what my meaning is. That's temporary. It's fleeting. It doesn't make it. It doesn't last. Maybe your job is your purpose and your meaning. Well, guess what? Eventually that's going to run out. It's not going to be satisfying. There's no ultimate meaning or purpose found there. And you'll actually find that whenever you pursue that, there's other things that could also have meaning and purpose in your life that you're abandoning. You will have, people trying to make their own meaning from misinformed pursuits. How many people do you know that they're so passionate and their life is wrapped up on something that's just not true? I mean, you see them all over social media, activists who are just so out there waving the banner, cheering and pushing for something that is false. I mean, they're just wrong. And their life is being wasted in that pursuit. We also see this kind of shown in several ways. I think that we know what our purpose is. We intuitively have this idea of what our purpose is. And I think we know this, that our lives actually are kind of better when it's focused on improving the world around us and the lives of people around us. I can actually track. I did this years ago, where the times of my life when I was happiest versus the times of my life that were more depressed and whatever, and the times where there was happiness and fulfillment and satisfaction were the times when I was being selfless. When my job and my pursuit and my attitude was, how may I improve the lives of others around me? And the times when I was pursuing selfishness and my own pleasure, those were the times of the greatest despair and depression and displeasure in my life. We also see this play itself out in culture. Right now, all of the arguments that you see going on in politics, breathe, I'm not getting political, calm down. All the arguments you see going on in politics, no matter what side it's from, are we must fix the problem. It's either we need a top-down solution where someone with power and authority comes in and makes it right, or you have people saying, no, what we need to do is empower people that they can fix the problems themselves and give them the strength and the tools they need to do it. But everybody's trying to do the same thing. They see a problem, they say, it needs fixed. We have in us this thing that says we need to fix problems. My purpose in life, we intuitively know this, that our purpose in life is to make life better. You want to know why that is? Christianity. What's the story of Christianity? God creates the world, right? Puts the Garden of Eden. By the way, the world is not paradise. You ever notice that in the Bible? Eden is paradise. The world is wild and untamed, but he puts mankind in Eden and he says, okay, multiply, fill the earth, subdue and have dominion. And the idea is take Eden, take this perfection, this paradise, and spread it into the untamed world. That's our purpose that we've been given by God. Now, before you want to just freak out on me and say, no, according to the Westminster Confession of Faith, the chief end of men is to glorify God and live with him forever. Yes, you're right. And part of the way that we do that and glorify God is by fulfilling this role that he's given us. However, we sinned. And so now it's not just that we're trying to bring order and harmony into an untamed world, but now there's sin and evil in the mix. But our task has not changed. I love this meme. I see it every now and then, and I just laugh every time I see it. It says, talking to Jesus there, he says, why do you allow things like famine and war and suffering and disease and crime and homelessness to exist in our world? And Jesus says, interesting that you should bring that up. I was about to ask you the same question. Because that's our purpose. As we shake our fist at God and say, God, why don't you do something to fix the world? And he said, I did. I gave him you. Because that's the purpose that we were given. What we intuitively know in all of our hearts that is our purpose, but as we seek to find other means of pleasure and fulfillment. I think that's one of the reasons why the problem of evil affects us so much is because we see the evil out there and we know that's not the way it's supposed to be, but we feel powerless to do anything about it. But God has said, no, that's what I've called you to do, is to battle against that, and we see that going on. But here's the thing, and this is what really gets at us, is we see the evil out there, but it's not just about the evil out there, it's the evil in here. We want to say, what do we do about that? Well, what do we do about this? See, we can fix some of the evil out there, but we can't fix the evil in here. But Jesus can. You know how he did? He died on the cross to pay the price for our sins and rose again that we might have new life. Hey, we just showed that that's actually true. because that's the world we live in. That's the reality of where we are, that God has put us on this world that we might push back against the darkness. But in order to do that, that we need the darkness in our hearts cleansed by Jesus Christ. So there you go. There's my case for the truth of Christianity. We got God that exists. We got Jesus rose from the dead. And the very purpose and deepest longings of our heart show that it's exactly what Christianity claims that it is.